There's been a great deal of anger about the innocence of Muslims. I'm rather angry about this situation as well, but for some somewhat different reasons from most people, or at least from most those people who are speaking out about it. I've watched it and the production values and acting are atrocious. I suppose if you don't let the cast and crew know what your movie is about, it makes it harder for them to do a good job. Perhaps they should have animated it with electronically disguised voices. Then when America has freedom of religion, freedom of speech and laws against violence, why do they feel they need to do such things? I think you know, because Muslims are prone to violence, have short fuses and hate their religion being criticized. Isn't that itself a serious indictment against Islam? Nobody seems to be addressing issues raised by this movie, so let's look at them. Maybe the movie makers had some evidence that I'm not aware of, or there's evidence against these claims that I'm not aware of, but I think we need to ask if these are issues that really need to be addressed. It starts with a bit about persecution of Coptic Christians by Muslims in present-day Egypt. Is this depicted accurately? I don't know, but I suspect there's a real problem here, and as the movie makers are Egyptian Coptic Christians, this may well be their motivation. This could be a non-violent reaction against violent persecution. Muhammad was illegitimate. The standard account of his birth is that he was an orphan, his father having died before he was born and his mother shortly afterwards. This is consistent with him being the product of an adulterous relationship for which his parents were executed, his father straight away and his mother after he was weaned. This sort of thing still goes on in some Muslim countries today. Is this relevant? Well, there's a reason why bastard has two meanings in English. People who don't have good parental support tend to grow up to be not very nice. It's possible that Muhammad was abused by the people who raised him, perhaps on the excuse that he got his parents killed. Abused kids often grow up to be abusive adults. If all the evidence is that Muhammad grew up into a nice man, this would be moot, but that isn't the case. Muhammad was dominated by his first wife, again very possible. She was a widow who was rather older than him and started off as his boss. Considering this, it seems very strange that Islam is so sexist today. Even if this is true, it isn't really a big issue, but Muslims may think otherwise due to their sexism. Muhammad was insane. I'm going to read chapter 5, verse 32 of the Quran, which is the verse people quote part of to prove that Islam is peaceful, but also read verse 33, the very next verse. On that account, we ordain for the children of Israel that if anyone slew a person unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slew the whole people, and if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole people. Then although there came to them our apostles with clear signs, yet, even after that, many of them continued to commit excesses in the land. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger, and strive with might and main for mischief through the land is execution, or crucifixion, or the cutting off of hands and feet from opposite sides, or exile from the land. That is their disgrace in this world. And a heavy punishment is theirs in the hereafter. So the peaceful bit is really a law for the children of Israel, the Jews, not Muslims. The next verse is the most violent in the Quran and is a law for Muslims. So Muslims expect Israel to be peaceful but are violent themselves. The question we want to ask here is, does this really sound like the words of a sane man? This isn't the only passage in the Quran that sounds like the words of a madman. Most of it does. It's very incoherent with frequent subject changes, doesn't make much sense, is very repetitive and, if English translations are anything to go by, has terrible grammar. Therefore, yes, there are reasons to think that Muhammad was a total nut job. Muhammad's book was partly provided by somebody else using bits of the Torah and bits of the New Testament. It should be obvious to anybody who's familiar with both the Quran and the Bible that the Quran does contain a number of Bible stories, mostly from Genesis. It includes a bizarre version of Jesus' birth story and claims that he wasn't really crucified, so the author must have known that Christians believe he was crucified, although he didn't agree with this view. Its author doesn't seem to have known so much about the rest of the Bible, but there are a few, rather garbled references to it. Although there are frequent references to Judgment Day, he doesn't seem familiar with the Book of Revelation. Certainly it's clear that the Quran was written by somebody with some knowledge of the Bible but who didn't understand it very well. Whether the Quran's author, presumably Muhammad, was given information by somebody more knowledgeable about the Bible or had just overheard some Bible stories probably isn't that important. Chapters 6 and 12 are more coherent and do seem to have been written by somebody more mentally together with a better knowledge of the Bible. What is important is that the Quran is a pathetic rip-off of the Bible. Muhammad was very violent. Well, there's lots of historical evidence for that. He certainly had lots of people killed and killed at least one man himself. The Quran, as we have seen, is full of violent teaching, including a verse after the one that's often quoted to prove that Islam is peaceful. Muhammad advised his men to kill male enemies, take the women as sex slaves and sell the children as slaves. He also said that they could use the children sexually. Again, there's evidence to support this, some of it from Muslim writings. Muhammad married a 6-year-old. This is generally accepted, even by Muslims. This is a strange thing for a normal man to do and probably suggests a larger problem of pedophilia. Muslims seldom sound stupider or more disgusting as when they're trying to defend this marriage. Muhammad broke treaties again. This is borne out by historical evidence. In fact, it's now Muslim law that they can make treaties with their enemies for up to 10 years but must break them. This makes peace negotiations with Muslims totally futile. Muhammad had a homosexual relationship with Omar. It's clear that Muhammad engaged in a great deal of heterosexual activity, so he couldn't be homosexual. He may have been bisexual, engaging in some homosexual activity, and there is some evidence of this from the Quran and Hadith. For example, Surah 50-24, and there shall wait on them, the Muslim men, young boys of their own, as fair as virgin pearls. Muhammad was a sex maniac. He had 13 wives, 11 of them at the same time. He married Aisha when she was only 6 years old. He married his adoptive son's wife after revealing a verse of the Quran telling him to do so. He also had many sex slaves. In fact, there's plenty of evidence in the Quran and Hadith to Muhammad's sexual excess and his use of religious revelations to justify this activity. Therefore, this movie raises issues which have some merit to them and ought to be discussed. Who thinks they have a better case, the one who wants to discuss an issue or the one who tries to silence any discussion? What really disgusts me about this issue is how so many people have vilified the filmmakers, rather than the violent Muslims, and the movie's content has been largely ignored. Hillary Clinton denounced this movie. Here's a message for her and other women who are sympathetic to Islam. Husbands should take full care of their wives, with the bounties God has given to some more than others and with what they spend out of their own money. Righteous wives are devout and guard what God would have them guard in the husband's absence. If you fear high-handedness from your wives, remind them of the teaching of God, then ignore them when you go to bed, then hit them. If they obey you, you have no right to act against them. God is most high and great. Yes, extremely sexist. This is Surah 4 verse 34 of the Quran. Yes, it does tell men to beat their wives. Muslims often argue that this means only lightly or in extreme circumstances, but I'm sure many Muslims use this as an excuse to beat their wives severely for no good reason. How can any woman or good man be a Muslim or be sympathetic to Islam knowing this? What about freedom of speech? A lot of people are acting as if either this cherished American principle is now completely dead or doesn't apply when Islam is involved. This utterly disgusts me and should disgust anybody concerned about human rights. A lot of people are acting as if it's inherently wrong to be anti-Islamic or anti-Muslim, and as if Islam should be protected from criticism the way other religions are not. Muslims are constantly insulting other religions. They insult Christianity by claiming that Jesus is neither God nor the Son of God. They insult Jews by claiming that God didn't give them the Holy Land. They insult both by claiming that Jews and Christians have changed the Bible. There are probably many more things that Muslims do which insults other religions. Muslims are always practicing double standards. If you come to our countries, you must live by our laws. If we come to your countries, you must live by our laws. We can do it to you, but you can't do it to us. Many non-Muslims are incomprehensibly willing to go along with this sort of garbage. If you believe a man to have been a prophet, you should logically follow his teachings. If you believe Muhammad was a prophet, you should be a Muslim. Conversely, if you've heard of Islam and are a Muslim, you must believe that Muhammad wasn't a prophet. He clearly claimed to be a prophet. In fact, he claimed to be the last and greatest prophet, so if he wasn't, he must have been a false prophet. Therefore all non-Muslims must believe that Muhammad was a false prophet. In fact, you can't even claim that he was a good, well-meaning man who just made a few mistakes, because all the evidence is that he was evil, violent, sexually perverted and mad. Therefore it logically follows that other religions must argue against Muhammad's claim to be a prophet in order to oppose Islam and survive themselves. If people aren't allowed to criticize Islam, how are other religions supposed to defend themselves against Islam, other than by violence? Favoritism towards Muslims is the same as discriminating against non-Muslims, particularly Jews and Christians. Am I the only person who's getting sick of Muslim double standards? You can't do it to us, but we can do it to you. Why do so many non-Muslims act as if this is acceptable? If we don't stand up for freedom of speech against Muslims, and have the same rules for everybody, what is to stop Islam from taking over the world?